Hello there, it's Jaymz Bee. Welcome to my vodcast every Friday right here on YouTube or jaymzbee.ca. You should go to my website, by the way, jaymzbee.ca. Sign up for a monthly newsletter, especially if you live in the GTA, and you'll have some great stuff. Listen, Liebe Hart is my guest this week. You might know him from Tim and Eric's awesome show, Great Job. He is a performance artist, a puppeteer, a lover, a poet. He's a hard guy to follow sometimes in an interview, but that's because his brain is firing on all cylinders. What a surreal show that was in Hamilton. I'll never forget it. And I got a little time to talk to him about his life, so that's coming up in just a moment. He talks about Quincy Jones and Gary Marshall, and it's hard to get him onto Adult Swim and to actually get him to talk about that because he's so busy talking about other stuff. But it's a cool interview, and it's coming up in about 5 minutes. First of all, what's happening in the clubs? Well, at Lula Lounge, something I've been waiting for weeks now. And that is the Vesuvius Music Showcase. I'll be emceeing that, and it's a company I started with Lorenzo de Gianfelice. He was my guest last week. So this is John Finley, the great soul singer, is going to perform, and the Tiki Collective with Genevieve Marentat, Jessica Lalonde, Irene Torres. The list goes on and on. It's a really interesting show. This Wednesday at Lula Lounge. Tickets available now. Go to Lula Lounge, lula.ca, and click on the Wednesday and pick up some tickets. But other things happening there. On Friday, tonight, Carla Diaz is performing, and then Yanni Burrell. So it's the Havana Club Friday, the Salsa Saturday, and a Gladys Knight tribute Sunday. Anyway, lots of cool stuff happening there. JV's Boogaloo Squad is there on Thursday, and Joel Byzantine is a great player. So, I mean, honestly, you could live at Lula all week. Lula.ca for information on all of those, and I really hope to see you Wednesday night, October 9th, for the Vesuvius Showcase. Old Mill Toronto tonight, Canadian Jazz Quartet. Now they play there the first Friday of every month. It's always jammed. Get there early. Shows at 7:30, no cover, but you want to get there early. And their special guest is Brian O'Kane on the trumpet. It's going to be a great show. Saturday, Mark Eisenman, Steve Wallace, Mike Murley, all backing up Arlene Smith, who's got a lovely voice. That's Saturday. And then next week on Wednesday, John McLeod, the great cornet, flugelhorn, and trumpeter. He's going to be performing there with his band. And Thursday Night Jazz Party, hosted by Sophia Perlman and Adrian Ferrugia. They make beautiful music together, literally and metaphorically, because they're married. But they always have friends pop up, and it's a party on Thursday night over at Old Mill. Hughes Room, the world-renowned slide guitarist Martin Simpson is there. And Saturday, Bill Durst. Bill Durst is a rock and blues player. He is a lovable guy. He's so down to earth. He's put out a bunch of records. And I'd say he's one of my favorite blues artists in Canada. So he's playing there on Saturday. Folk poet on Sunday, David Francie. The Stanfields in from Halifax on Tuesday. And there's also Australian Blues Wednesday and Joe Cocker and Leon Russell tribute on Thursday. HughesRoomLive.com. They're very busy over there. Jazz Bistro, tonight and tomorrow, the Latin Jazz Festival continues. And on Sunday, one of my favorite classical bands, Peadora Tango Ensemble. It's a 4-piece band, but it sounds so much bigger, super romantic. And whenever you go to Jazz Bistro, be sure to order dinner, make dinner reservations. The food is incredible. Oh, also, Hallie Lauren, she was born in Alaska. She spent a decade now touring the world. She's like a rising star, but more like a shooting comet. She's getting very famous, and she's going to be there also this week. So check out all the listings at jazzbistro.ca. I want to thank my sponsors, Paul Barber at barberfinancial.com. If you have financial concerns, go to his site, take a look, write to him and tell him you know me. I'm sure he can help you out. Also, Barbarian Steakhouse. I was there twice this week for television shoots. That's cool. It's a steakhouse. It's a great place to bring a date, grab some cocktails before the theater, or book the place for a TV shoot or a private party. 7 Elm Street. And finally, a Patreon. Everyone who's donated on Patreon, thank you so much. I know we live in crazy times, and supporting an artist is like the old days. You can be my Medici. Patreon.com. I want to get to this interview. Oh my God, this guy, sometimes when he works a puppet, he moves his mouth and doesn't move the puppets. Sometimes him and the puppet have the same voice. Sometimes there's a crazy backdrop with visuals behind him. He's a performance artist, and I was really lucky to get to talk to him. David Liebe Hart is coming up right about now. David, hello.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Very good. I first want to ask you about your love of puppets. When did you first find out that you loved puppets so much?
Well, when my mother bought me a puppet called Willie Daly, who was a plastic Will, and he was handmade, a handmade puppet, and he shot it, and he squeezed water, and his head in the water would come out like a will on top. And his name was Willie Daly. He was a blue clown. And then I saw so many puppet shows that I loved. When I went to the Christian Science Church, 17th Church of Christ Scientists on Wacker Drive, I had Bert Stilston, who did Kukla, Friend, and Ollie, and he would teach with Kukla the dragon and the clown the Bible, the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes. And then we went to family reunions in Washington, D.C., and then Jim Henson was teaching with at the Christian Science Church with Kermit the Frog, and back then he had a puppet show called Sam and Friends.
What year would this have been?
This was back in the 60s.
Yeah.
60s, early 60s. And he taught us, he had a local puppet show called Sam and Friends before he had Sesame Puppets on the Muppets or Sesame Street, and then he was on the Jimmy Dean show with Fur the Dog, and he would sometimes teach with Fur the Dog or Kermit the Frog the Sunday school, and it was just a lot of fun having him as a Sunday school teacher. He had a big beard. We called him the Puppet Santa Claus because he gave us gifts of joys of Kermit the Frog and Furry the Dog. That was the dog on the Jimmy Dean show.
When did you first get paid to do a puppet show?
Wow.
How old would you be?
I belong to the Puppet Guild of America, and I started doing free puppet shows for the Christian Science Church, and they didn't pay me anything because it was for Sunday school. But they did pay you if you called for a Christian Science treatment for prayer. They would charge you, send you a big bill. But anyway, I started doing puppet shows locally for the carnivals and the parks, and then I got paid. And then I did I met Jim Henson and Bert Stilston before they died at UCLA College, and they said that they wanted a religious puppet show to be done teaching kids about Christian Science. And at first I didn't. They asked Jean Stapleton, who was a Christian Scientist. She didn't want to do it. They asked Ginger Rogers. She didn't want to do it. And she was a famous Christian Scientist. And they asked Mickey Rooney. He didn't want to do it. He was a Christian Scientist, but he switched over to the Church of Better Living before he passed on. So I agreed to do it, and I faced a lot of persecution. We first filmed in 1988, our first puppet show that was produced at First Church of Christ Scientists in Yucaipa, California, with a lady named Sandy Anderson, and she produced the show with me, and the episodes, the first 3 episodes in 1988, were aired on public access on Continental Cablevision and Century Cable and Heritage Cable, which is now Spectrum Cable.
Was this all in Los Angeles?
All in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And then and then the puppeteering goes back there. I was friends with Roy Brown, the clown, who was the puppeteer on the Garfield Goose Show. He invited me in the 60s to work Garfield Goose and Ron Rabbit, and that was a show and tell. They had show and tell on the Garfield Goose Show. It started off in black and white and went into color. And then I had a treat with meeting the Friendly Giant face to face when I came to a family reunions here in Canada. And
right, no one knows you knew the Friendly Giant. You got to meet him.
Yeah, I got to meet him.
Bob Honey.
Bob Honey was in a church teaching with Rusty the Chicken and Jerome Giraffe, and then he had a raccoon puppet that played the flute.
Yeah.
He had 2 Siamese cats that played the flute, and they were It had this tiny furniture but he was so creative, and I met him, visiting at one of the local churches in the Montreal area, and then I wrote to him and stayed in contact with him, and he told me to pursue my puppeteering and my love for children, and I was a preschool teacher at Griffin Preschool. And Daphne Preschool that Art Linkletter had, the famous Art Linkletter, only called it Daphne's Preschool, and it was on Fairfax and Los Angeles near Pico Boulevard. And Art Linkletter had me to teach with puppets, and Bill Cosby took over a show. He did a lot of television work for Channel 40 Trinity TV before he passed on.
So when did you get discovered by Adult Swim? Was it the Tim and Eric show first, or did someone else find you?
Well, I did stand-up comedy with Robin Williams at the Comedy Store, and I wanted to I could have been discovered then, but Gary Marshall was kind of racist toward me. He made a remark that he didn't want this Daffy Duck black guy to be on his show with Rob. He just only wanted Robin Williams, so I was doing stand-up comedy with. So Robin Williams did one show called Ork the Martian, and then they gave him a spin-off called Mork and Mindy. And Gary Marshall told me if I did intern work, that he would gradually put me in one of his TV shows. And I came there every Tuesday and every Thursday, and I did intern work there. I did the before the shows began. He had me do the warm-ups before the shows, telling jokes, and then bringing out the cast members. And I got to work this went on for 4 years, and then Betty Garrett, who played the landlady on Laverne and Shirley, says, "This isn't fair, Gary Marshall. David's now been working here for 4 years, and you won't write him in any shows." And Betty Garrett was told by Gary Marshall, "If you criticize me for not having David Liebe Hart on the show, you'll be written off the show." And so Betty Garrett was written off Laverne and Shirley. Then after she married Laverne's dad on the series, then they moved the show like it was being done in Los Angeles, California, and she was never seen on the show again, and they replaced her with some Swedish actress.
Wow.
And she stuck up for me. And Betty Garrett's husband, because Betty Garrett's husband was an atheist and a communist, Ronald Reagan had him blackballed from doing any TV work. So Betty Garrett had to take care of her family and her husband by doing television work since he was blackballed from TV, and I didn't think that was fair.
Right. And did you? So do you think that it was later that you? I mean, you were discovered. People knew you before that.
Well, what happened then? Betty Garrett had me to do music, do solo work in music and puppeteering with a church, which is a spin-off from Christian Science called Unity. By Charles and Merle Fillmore. Betty Garrett was a member of Unity by the Sea, and Betty Garrett was friends with Mr. Bob Seekings, and his brother played on Hill Street Blues. And it never gelled. Next thing I knew, boy, that guy is sending me some really mean messages. We definitely got to get him moved off there in the bubble.
You get some weird fan mail and weird social media, don't you?
Yeah, but can you get this one blocked?
Here, I'll look at this while you tell me your story.
It's the blue. It's the bad FU word.
Right.
So we need to block him. So then I did a lot of freelance puppeteering. I then had a short work with Bob Baker and his marionettes in Los Angeles. Bob Baker was really Latino. He really wasn't white, and he had me to do a little work in his office. In exchange, he repaired my puppets, and he got me doing puppet shows, into doing my own puppet shows for different preschools and different schools, like he did for the Unified School District. And I did cartoon sketches of the kids dressed up as a clown, and that was. And then I did acting. I went to acting at Goodman Theater in Chicago, as well as what brought me to California was Quincy Jones saw me performing, doing busting as a street musician, and he told me he wanted to help and give new talent a chance. So I traveled to California when I got out of the service in '76, and went to Quincy Jones' workshop. And Quincy Jones was really only interested in pushing the guy that does the Prince of Bel-Air, Mr. Smith, and Michael Jackson. He wasn't interested in really pushing small people to get a break.
Right.
And so I did nothing ever gelled.
So Quincy Jones saw you play live, but he didn't put on records or
when I came
anything.
to
Yeah.
California, he didn't follow through on saying what he was going to do to help me. That's what brought me to California. And then I started doing extra work in the different TV shows and movies. I did 48 hours, and I got a couple speaking lines, which got me into SAG. And then I got into after winning on the Gong Show twice.
You were in the Gong Show?
Yes.
With a puppet?
Out with a puppet. Chuck Barris didn't want me to use a puppet. He wanted me to sing a country western song with a rope, getting to where the warm weather is. And I did that and then I wanted to do an act with the puppets, but he says, no, I'm directing the show. And he had me to do an odd song, which got me gonged the third time, and J.B. Morgan gonged me the third time. I think that was close to time that she did indecent exposure. They asked her to show her breasts, which got her written off the show. A lot of people got breaks at the same time I was on the Gong Show.
Right, like the unknown comic. Maybe you saw him without the bag on his head.
I saw him, and Cheryl Ladd got a break from the show. And this comedian, I can't think of her name, but she was like Ellen DeGeneres, and she was kind of a heavy-set lady, and she was, I can't think of her name, but she got her break on the Gong Show. A lot of people got breaks from the Gong Show. In fact, Pee Wee Herman's co-star got his break on the Gong Show, but I never got discovered from the Gong Show. So I kept on mailing out my pictures and resumes. I was doing stand-up comedy at the Comedy Store, the Improvisation. I was doing busting as a street musician at the Hollywood Bowl and the Music Center. There I met Frank Sinatra. He says, "Where's this beautiful singing coming from?" And Frank Sinatra took me to see his last show, the Rack Pat, and there he wanted to introduce me to Sammy Davis Jr. Since Sammy Davis Jr. was doing nightclub work in Las Vegas, and Sammy Davis Jr. tore up my picture and resume and tap danced on it, said he would be the only Sammy Davis Jr., which was very embarrassing in front of the Rack Pack and Frank Sinatra. But Frank Sinatra let me do voiceovers for his record company that he used to own on Sunset Boulevard near Gower. And then I met Danny Kaye, and Danny Kaye was Jewish. He was wonderful. He introduced me to my first talent agent, Tina Marie. Tina Marie owned a Jewish restaurant called Cantor's. And there she had stand-up comedy, and I did stand-up comedy there in Fairfax area.
So you met Danny Kaye. That's a big thing, isn't it?
He gave me a copy of his black and white TV show he used to do. And then I met Milton Berle, who was converted to Christian Science from Judaism, and he shared his black and white shows that he did. And he told me he had ventriloquists. He called him Uncle
Milty.
Uncle Milky. He said his mother was a police department, worked for the police department, and taught him to be a boxer. That's what he told me.
Danny Kaye or Uncle Milty?
Uncle Milty.
Yeah.
And he was real funny, and he used to remember the Beverly Hills Christian Science Church. There was a guy named Martin Brunis who started out as a producer and an actor, and he went on to being a Christian Science practitioner, and he taught Doris Day class instruction in Christian Science. And he was a real brilliant songwriter and actor and producer. And then Kay Kaiser was a Christian Scientist, a jazz player. And
I knew Kay Kaiser was fantastic.
He introduced me to Bill Provost, who gave me was my music teacher, and my favorite saying by Bill Provost was, "When you rule your mind, you rule your world." No, you have the same intelligence and the same great talent to get good grades. And whenever I felt discouraged, that's what he would share with me.
Yeah. One last question, and that is just about the Adult Swim. How did that come about?
Okay, I was mailing out my pictures and resumes, and I met this casting director and producer named Ben Burr. And he says, "We got your pictures and resumes. We want to interview you to do the Tim and Eric Awesome Show. Great job." And so they were interviewing a lot of other African-American puppeteers. And for some strange reason, Tim and Eric says, "That's the guy we want." And then they asked me to write a wacky song about UFOs. And I wrote one called Salome, using the real language of the Palladians and the Corinthians. And I did 5 seasons of the Tim and Eric Awesome Show. Great job. Another 5 seasons to check it out with Dr. Steve Brule, with John C. Reilly. That was a spinoff from the Tim and Eric Awesome Show. Great job. Then they had me do Tim and Eric Night Live, which was a radio show like this is. And then they gave me my own show recently, last year, called I Love David, which was a spinoff from the Tim and Eric Show, talking all about me, but it's only on the internet. And I did 10 episodes, but Adult Swim only won at 6. And it's on the Tim and Eric's Adult Swim Channel 5 that you can see I Love David. And it talks about all my growing up and everything.
Right. Well, thank you. We're going to have a lot to search about you, and I'm glad you came to Canada.
One last thing I want to say is I'm really hurt that my favorite clown, Monty Melvin, that was Jewish, was they have no pictures of him on WGM. And when I called up their archives, they said they destroyed all his pictures and everything. He was a wonderful clown. He produced many of the Bozo shows. He replaced Bozo when Bozo got sick, and he really inspired me to be a comedian. And a love for comedy was Monty Melvin. And WGM has no pictures or anything about him.
We're going to go searching deep, because you're right. I have never seen. I Googled that, and I never found any.
They kept Cookie the Clown. In fact, they did the Pepsi challenge with clowns. The Bozo said he only wanted Cookie or Monty Melvin on his show. So what he did is he told the kids to all vote for Cookie if they gave them money and candy and games. And so everybody voted for Cookie, and nobody voted for Monty Melvin. They made Monty Melvin walk off the Bozo show with a teddy bear, never to return, with tears in his eyes. And that's no way to treat a producer of a show and a person that was a talented clown as Monty Melvin. And it really broke my heart what happened to him. And I would like to his real name as Larry Richard. He looks like one of Dick Smothers. One of my fans, Ryan, sent me a picture of him, but a black and white picture of him without makeup, but I can't seem to get it out of my phone.
Wow.
Hey, well, David, we got your VIP meet and greet people waiting for
you. Here we go. You've got a whole bunch of fans coming.
What do you think about that? Won't you get that picture so I can see the picture of Monty Melvin?
Oh, this is just recording video. This is a backup camera.
I found the picture of Monty Melvin.
Here, let me punch it out. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Show it to them?
Yes.
The
this is David's painting of Monty Melvin and Cookie.
Oh, amazing.
Great interview.
Why don't you put it on the
Hold
air?
on, I'll put it right here. There we are.
So he's at least remembered by the picture.
Yep.
And that was cruel what they did between those two clowns. Wow, was that ever good?
I mean, was that ever good? Wow! Anyway, he didn't have a puppet when I interviewed him, but you have got to check him out on YouTube. You can thank me later. Next week, I'm going to be speaking with Don Dixon, the world-renowned photographer. He has shot so many rock stars, so many jazz greats. We're going to hear his story next week. Until then, thanks for watching. Please share.